When it comes to workplace violence, most business owners think about their employee safety and what can happen if they're injured. But did you know, as a business owner, you also have to think about the invitees to your business and how they can be impacted by workplace violence and what that can cost your firm, because if an invitee is injured either by your own employee or by somebody from the outside, that's not under workers' comp. That's going to fall under general liability litigation, premises liability litigation, and that could cost you dearly. In this video, we're going to talk about invitee safety to your business and the steps you can take to help keep them safe from workplace violence. Hi, I'm Mike Corwin. For 30 years, I conducted investigations into violent incidents, and I helped attorneys prepare cases against businesses where violence occurred. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of those cases so you can get a real feel for what it's like. But most importantly, this video should set off a light bulb about not just thinking about your employee safety, but how you can protect and make sure that your invitees, and that's patients, clients, customers to your business, how they're going to be kept safer from workplace violence. And in case you find this information helpful, I've got a link in the description below that you can click on to learn more about the services that I provide to business owners and professionals like yourself. Okay, so now let's talk about the sources of violence that can be directed towards invitees to your business that you need to incorporate into your workplace violence prevention program. One is, of course, the obvious one of violence from your own employees directed at invitees. And what do I mean by invitees? It's patients, it's clients, it's customers, it can be contractors that are doing work at your work site, it can be vendors. We call them invitees because you invite them to come to your workplace as part of your normal course of business. Another source of violence towards invitees can be members of the public that are just out in the community. You know, they may come onto your premises, into your business, not because they're supposed to, but because they're there to commit a crime. So think about somebody who's attacks an invitee in the parking lot, or who actually is in the parking lot to steal a catalytic converter, and the invitee sees them and approaches them. The other source can be another invitee. And a really easy example of this is when two contractors are working at your business location and they get into an incident. So we need to factor that into your different approaches to workplace violence prevention. We mostly look at this from a premises liability type thing or general negligence, that you have a responsibility to maintain your work location in a safe manner, free from violence and criminal acts. And these are basically, obviously, things that are foreseeable. You know, if something unknown that you could never have imagined, that's a different story. But what we're talking about here are known safety hazards that foreseeably can injure your invitees. Now, let me talk about that for a little bit. I worked on a case where our client was a customer at a store, and she was violently attacked, stabbed 28 times in the parking lot by a man who had been hanging out in the parking lot trying to steal purses, trying to rob people that were going in and out of the store over the course of several days. And in this case, the store employees were notified and even prepared incident reports during these encounters, but they never did anything to get this guy out of there. They didn't call the police. They didn't try to make sure that he was gone. They did not have, by the way, surveillance cameras for the parking lot or to do any kind of real inspection of, you know, circling the parking lot, checking to see who should and shouldn't be there. And this was a really brutal case that resulted in significant long-term lifetime injuries. She had to undergo multiple surgeries, and that's the kind of thing that you can prevent but that you absolutely don't want occurring on your premises. It's going to harm your business for a very long period of time if that type of incident happens. One of the best ways to start by doing that, and it's an obligation, California's workplace violence prevention law requires you to do it, is to conduct an assessment of the safety hazards, both those that face to your employees, but also those that invitees face as well. And that includes your physical premises. That might be things like lighting, that might be looking at the ingress and egress to your property. It might be looking at what types of obstacles are in the parking lot where a person could hide, or that forces a pedestrian to walk to a location where a person can hide. It can be, a dumpster. It can be a big parking column. All of those types of things that offer up a place for someone to hide. And under the law, you're required to conduct an assessment and then look at ways that you can remedy those safety hazards, whether it's through training, whether it's through conducting improvements, tenant improvements, whether it's notifying your landlord to say, hey, look, we have a safety issue here. I want to bring it to your attention to make sure that you take care of it. But those are all types of things that you would look at in your assessment. You would also look at the flow internally of your business and your workplace to make sure that you're not creating bottlenecks, places where an invitee could be isolated by somebody who's there to commit a wrongdoing. I'll give you a really good example of that on an actual case I worked on. There was a mall that had the food court right next to the arcade where kids would come in and play games. And there was a sexual predator that sat in the arcade looking for possible victims. And in doing so, he followed in our young client, who I believe was very young, who went in with an older sibling. And because of how the arcade was laid out, there were multiple areas that were dark, that were out of view of employees. The employees were not walking around inspecting and looking for issues. And that gave this pedophile the opportunity to molest our client. So again, these are the types of things that a business can know is a problem and should look to remedy. And doing an assessment, not just of your external, but also the layout internally. Because if you think about it, putting the food court right near the kids' arcade is like putting a kid into a candy store, right? They're literally able to watch and look for that target that they want to then molest. So think about it from the mall's perspective. This was easily foreseeable, right? You have the food court where this person can hang out as long as he wants until he sees a possible victim come in. You had the arcade itself darkly lit so that all of the toys and games could light up. You had employees who were not making rounds. That is clearly a recipe for disaster to happen. And in our case, for our poor child who'd have to deal with this, our client who would have to deal with this, that was the recipe for a horrific safety hazard. So businesses have to go ahead and do that assessment, whether it's externally or internally. And then once you do that assessment, you've got to make those corrections. You've got to train staff. You may have to move physical things. You may need to incorporate more lighting. All of those different types of things that can remedy the safety hazard make it less likely for that type of thing to occur, so that you are doing the types of protections that your invitees need. And again, an invitee is a customer, so in the case of the arcade and the mall, that was an invitee. Okay, so what are we talking about now? What happens if you fail to take action? Well, that's where I used to come in. A law firm would get hired and they would hire me to conduct an investigation and to look at all of the different safety hazards, to conduct that assessment, to determine what types of ways these horrific things happened, and how to make sure they didn't happen again. And for us to say this was clearly something that you knew or should have known as a business owner or as the property owner. Could be either or both. We would typically sue both. So that's where we would come in and look at it. And that's why I know that this is a very expensive thing for you if this happens. Let's flip this around for a second. If an invitee attacked an employee, chances are that attack on the employee is going to fall under workers' comp. It's bad for business. Your revenue could still drop. There are people that may decide that you don't run a safe location and they're not going to be a patron there. They're not going to be a customer or a client there. But if an invitee is attacked by someone else, a member of the public, an invitee, or even one of your own employees, and for that, think about this: a bouncer in a bar or a restaurant employee who attacks somebody who's come in to patronize the establishment. I've worked on plenty of cases like that as well. So you've got a situation now where you're facing general liability and premises liability, and there are a lot of insurance premiums that will not cover an intentional assault. So think about workplace violence. If that's an intentional assault, the insurance company is going to fight you, and you may have to pay that out of pocket. And so clearly we want to talk about what you need to do. Now, when it comes to remedying the types of threats that you're dealing with, there are a couple of things that I think are really important. One, you want your employee feedback. They're in there all the time. Okay, what types of things have they noticed? Have there been near misses? Have there been situations where they were trapped by an invitee as the only person in the room, or the invitee got between the door and themselves? Have there been people that have been coming onto your premises in order to commit crime? Remember the days of copper theft? Now it's your catalytic converter theft. But there are people looking to break into cars. There are people that come in looking to steal from your business. There are also people that come in with intent to commit sexual assault. All of those are community driven, and invitees need to be protected. So how would you protect that? Can you implement an approach that prevents someone from accessing your business, hardening the target, sort of, but more likely involving your employees and making sure everyone is checked in when they come in, make sure they're assigned a visitor badge, make sure that anytime an invitee comes in to meet with someone, that person is aware that they're coming on premises, so that you have the ability to track comings and going. Are you training your employees to make sure that when an invitee comes in, that there isn't a situation where the invitee and the employee are both in there by themselves, particularly if you're dealing with situations, and this is classic for a law firm. Let's say you're doing a deposition and opposing counsel is there, their client is there, and their client is the guy that molested my client in the arcade. Do you really want this guy walking around unfettered access to your own employees, particularly your female employees? No, you don't want that, so you need to set up safeguards. That might be an escort, so if he needs to leave the deposition to use the restroom, you've got somebody keeping tabs on him to make sure he doesn't have unfettered access to your workplace. So these are just a few of the different things that you need to do, but remember, you have a duty to inspect your property for safety hazards, to look at your employees. Now let's take a quick look at one more element of this. What happens if you have hired someone who has a history of criminal violence? Whether you haven't done your background check. A lot of states are making it harder to do a thorough background check. But if you hire someone and you know that they have a history, or you should have known that they have a history, that becomes a problem. Negligent hiring, negligent retention come on the table, and that can be very expensive, particularly if the employee attacked an invitee rather than a coworker where workers' comp might come in. It's still, again, workers' comp is going to get very expensive. Your premiums are going to rise. Your medical costs are going to rise. People may not want to patronize your business as a result of that happening. But if it's an attack by one of your employees on an invitee, that's going to get very expensive. You're going to face significant legal bills, significant medical costs to cover for someone else, and that liability may end up coming from your own pockets if the insurance companies determine that it's an intentional assault. So you need to look at how you're hiring people, whether you're doing a background investigation, whether you are updating those investigations every once in a while to make sure that a person hasn't committed violent acts while they're employed by you. You need to find all of that out, and you need to look at ways of dealing with it. So what happens if you have an employee that keeps threatening other employees? Are you conducting an investigation? Do you have a complaint system where that can be reported? Because if you have a known problem within your employees, and you don't take steps to unearth those or to follow up on complaints that are brought forward, that's negligent retention, that's negligent hiring, and you have the ability to be hit with a really major fine and also a massive civil lawsuit on that. So if this stuff is brought to your attention, you need to make sure you address it, that you have an effective complaint system, that you have an effective investigation system, that you bring in witnesses to interview, and that your goal is to get to the truth of what happened, not to kind of do a CYA cover your ass type investigation. Because if you leave that person in place and something bad happens, you're going to be on the hook for that. People like myself that conduct investigations for the lawyers on the other side are going to be able to unearth that, and then you're going to have to prove why you didn't do what needed to be done. And chances are pretty good, if it's an intentional assault, your insurance company is probably going to fight you on that, and that means it could be coming out of your pocket, and that can be a significant hit to your business. To recap, we need to conduct an assessment of the physical premises, both internally and externally, to make sure that you are aware of any possible safety hazards, and two, to make sure you remedy those safety hazards. Then on top of that, you need to look at how you're hiring your employees, who you're hiring, what type of information you're learning, and what steps you are taking to either make sure that they are contained and can't harm someone, or that they are not hired, or if something happens while they're working for you and it's brought to your attention, you need to have a complaint and investigation system that's effective. Those are really good ways to unearth the safety hazards within the workplace that can affect invitees to your business, and to make sure that they are protected from violence, which you're required to do. So thanks for watching this video. If you found it useful, go ahead and check out the link below to my services, and hey, set up an appointment if you think I can help you.